said Nanny. "No good will come of all this magical nonsense." And Nanny was right. Just before Ruby's 10th birthday, the Emperor of Tishan, a small state on the borders of China, invited Mr. and Mrs. Genie to perform a magical feat that hadn't been attempted since the pyramids were built. Sad to say, it proved to be the death of Mr. and Mrs. Genie, who disappeared in a spectacular meteor of fireworks. All that was left behind was a lamp, a wand, and a pile of unpaid bills. At the tender age of 10, Ruby was an orphan. The bad news brought with it a lawyer who appeared like a rabbit pulled from a top hat.
"A very sad business. Such great stars. Quite wonderful. Unfortunately, not so wonderful with money. In short, the house will have to be sold."
"But what about Ruby?" interrupted Nanny. The lawyer looked quite surprised to find there was a little girl in the room. He pulled even more papers out of his briefcase.
"Here I have it."
He cleared his throat and read,
"In case of any unforeseen misfortune like death, having no other living relatives, Ruby, the only child of the late Mr. and Mrs. Genie, is to go to a boarding school for magic."
"But that's ridiculous," said Nanny. "The girl can't do any magic."
"That," said the lawyer, "is not my problem."
Finding a school of magic that would take Ruby was difficult. Wizodine Academy refused to take a child with no magical talent, even if she was the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Genie, and they felt it was a great mistake that she had been allowed to learn reading and writing. Ruby also failed to get a place at several other well-known schools for magic, for the same reasons. The house was being packed up around Ruby, and still no school had been found. Then, out of the blue, just before the removal van arrived, came a letter from Grimlock School for Conjurors and Magicians. To everyone's amazement, Ruby was being offered a scholarship. The lawyer accepted the place immediately. No time was wasted in packing Ruby up. All she owned in the world went into her suitcase, her new school uniform, her mum's wand, and her dad's lamp. These she'd been given by the lawyer, who thought, wrongly, that they had little value except to Ruby. Nanny said a tearful goodbye. "Look after yourself and remember the 3 R's, she said. A sold sign went up outside Ruby's house. The lawyer snapped shut his briefcase, shook Ruby's hand, and was gone, as was everything else that had made up Ruby's life.
"Grimlock School? Never heard of it,"
said the taxi driver. Ruby showed him the address again. They'd been driving around in circles. Ruby was sure they were completely lost when they came across a battered sign covered with ivy. Ruby's heart began to sink. The mock Tudor building, half hidden in a dark wood, was a gloomy sight.
"Not a very cheerful-looking place,"
said the taxi driver, helping Ruby out with her suitcase. At that moment, the front door opened, and the headmistress, Miss Pinkerton, came out. She was a large lady shaped like a bell. "Ruby, Genie, we have been waiting for you," she said briskly. "This way, if you please." Ruby was shown into the headmistress's office. The room was full of noisy, ticking clocks of various shapes and sizes. "I must say how pleased we are to welcome you to Grimlock's," said Miss Pinkerton. We are not a big school, but our aim is to turn out boys and girls who are a credit to the world of magic. You are the first child ever to be given a scholarship by us. We feel sure that with such brilliant parents, you are bound to be a very gifted little girl. Now I will tell you what we expect from our star student. Ruby was never to find out what was expected of her, for at that moment all the clocks started to chime one after another. It was a whole 5 minutes before she could hear one word of what the headmistress was saying. Then Miss Pinkerton stood up. "Glad we sorted all that out," she said. Ruby felt the moment had passed to say anything about not having any magical talent. Miss Pinkerton kept looking at Ruby as if waiting for something. "Haven't you got something for me, Ruby?" she said at last. Ruby looked baffled. "The lamp! Your father's lamp!" said Miss Pinkerton. Ruby opened up her small suitcase and took out the lamp. The headmistress seized it and held it up to her ample bosom. "To hold such a lamp as this!" she cried in tones of delight before locking it up in a glass display case.
"But I would rather like to keep it with me if it's all the same to you," said Ruby. "It's all I've got to remember my father by."
"Keep it?" Miss Pinkerton said, going very red in the face. "A lamp of this magnitude in the hands of a child? You must be out of your mind. Did I see a wand in your suitcase too? Give it to me, please." The wand was put in her desk along with pea shooters, stink bombs, catapults, and all the other things the children were not allowed. After Ruby had unpacked, she was taken into the dining hall. About 50 children were seated on benches at 2 long wooden tables. "This is our scholarship pupil, Ruby Genie," said Miss Pinkerton. Ruby took her place at the table between a boy called Zack and a girl called Lily.
"You couldn't turn this into chips and sausages with lots of tomato sauce, could you?"
said Zack hopefully. "No," said Ruby sadly, looking down at the pale grey lumpy things that made up supper.
"It must be wonderful to be as good at magic as you,"
Lily said. Ruby smiled weakly. She wished more than anything that she was. The next day, in the school assembly, Miss Pinkerton was in a good mood. It had been a stroke of brilliance, she thought, to offer Ruby a scholarship. It couldn't be a better advertisement for Grimlocks and was bound to bring in other children whose parents had money that was much needed. It would also keep the Grand Wizard happy. Last year, he had nearly closed the school down due to its bad teaching and dilapidated buildings. "Now, children," said Miss Pinkerton, giving a rare and terrible smile. "You have by now all met our star pupil, Ruby. Ruby, dear, will you come up here?" Ruby walked up onto the stage at the end of the hall where the staff and headmistress were seated. "I'd like to introduce you to our staff. Miss Fisher, Magimatics, Mr. Gaspard, Conjuring Tricks, Madame Vanish, Grand Illusions, and lastly myself, Special Effects. Now, Ruby, I am sure you can't wait to show us your magical skills, so I thought you could start by doing something simple, like a little flying or perhaps a disappearing act." Ruby stood frozen to the spot, hoping that the floor would open and swallow her up. Everyone was looking at her. "When you are ready," said Miss Pinkerton impatiently. Ruby felt herself getting smaller. A very strange sensation. Suddenly she had a brainwave. "I'm awfully sorry, but I only ever did magic with my mum and dad. I'm not used to having so many people watching." Miss Pinkerton looked much relieved at this explanation, and said in a very solemn voice to the whole school,